When a powerful Wall Street banker coldly denies an emergency loan to a desperate mother whose twin children need urgent heart surgery, he believes he is just making another routine business decision. But when one of the children shows him a faded photograph and innocently asks, "Are you our daddy?" Robert Mitchell's carefully built life crumbles in seconds. Forced to confront 16 years of choices that abandoned not only a great love but children he never knew existed, this man who controls millions will discover that some debts cannot be paid with money, and that redemption sometimes comes disguised as a second chance he doesn't deserve but that could cost more than any fortune he has ever amassed.
Hello. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. At the end, please rate the story. I will be happy to respond to you in the comments. Now, let's get to the story.
The alarm sounded precisely at 5:45 a.m. in the luxurious penthouse apartment on Park Avenue. Robert Mitchell opened his eyes with the same mechanical precision he applied to every aspect of his life. At 38 years old, with 15 of those fully dedicated to the First National Bank, he had turned discipline into an art. A discipline that had earned him a fortune few in Manhattan could ever dream of attaining. The morning silence on the 35th floor was broken only by the distant murmur of traffic below, a sound that to Robert represented the relentless pulse of money flowing through the city. He rose from the king-size bed, his bare feet touching the warm Italian marble floor. Each step echoed softly down the wide hallway leading to the master bathroom, where the automatic lights illuminated a suite rivaling the best five-star hotels in the world. The multi-jet shower enveloped him in hot steam as Robert mentally planned the day's moves. That's how his mind worked, always 3 steps ahead, calculating probabilities, anticipating obstacles, identifying profit opportunities. 15 years ago, when he took over as president of the First National Bank, many doubted a 23-year-old could lead a century-old institution. Today, those same skeptics bowed to the impressive numbers Robert had achieved as he slipped into his navy Armani suit, one of the 25 hanging in his climate-controlled closet. The Italian silk slid over his shoulders like a second skin. Robert had always believed appearance mattered as much as the numbers in a ledger. Power moves started with image, and his image was flawless. In the gourmet kitchen, the Italian coffee maker had already brewed his double espresso. He drank it standing, gazing through the panoramic windows at Central Park, where the first morning joggers were appearing on the trails. Down there, ordinary people began their ordinary lives, trapped in mediocre jobs, dreaming of the financial security Robert had captured before turning 30. The phone buzzed quietly on the granite countertop. A message from Marcus, his driver, confirming that the Bentley was waiting at the building's entrance. Robert smiled. Not a smile of joy, but one of calculated satisfaction. Everything in his life worked like Swiss clockwork, each piece in its right place, every move timed to maximize efficiency. The private elevator descended silently through 35 floors. When the bronze and glass doors opened in the marble lobby, Robert had already reviewed the 3 contracts he would sign before lunch. Each represented millions in commissions for the bank, millions that would translate into substantial bonuses for his personal account. Marcus held the Bentley's rear door open, his uniform impeccable as always. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," he said with the professional courtesy Robert expected from all his employees. "Wall Street, Marcus, and avoid Madison. There's roadwork near 42nd Street. Robert didn't lift his eyes from the tablet where he was already reviewing the day's first reports. Numbers, graphs, projections. That was the language he spoke fluently, more natural to him than idle small talk. The Bentley slid through the morning traffic like a shark navigating familiar waters. Robert reflected on how far he'd come, how many tough decisions he'd made, how many relationships sacrificed on the altar of success. When his parents died in a car accident, leaving only debts and a tarnished name, Robert swore never to be financially vulnerable again. He turned that vulnerability into fuel, that pain into relentless determination. In his early years at the bank, he worked 16-hour days, studied every client, memorized every regulation. When the opportunity arose, a hostile takeover the majority shareholders tried to block, Robert had prepared for months. He used insider information, exploited legal loopholes, manipulated votes of smaller shareholders. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. When the dust settled, he was in command. Since then, his reputation had grown somewhere between legend and warning in the financial district. Robert Mitchell took no prisoners in business. Family companies unable to honor loans were ruthlessly liquidated. Inexperienced investors who trusted his advice lost fortunes as Robert tilted markets in his favor. He slept perfectly well at night because he understood one fundamental truth. In business, there are only predators and prey. The phone rang inside the Bentley. It was Jennifer, his executive secretary, her efficient voice cutting through the traffic noise. "Mr. Mitchell, the Japanese moved the meeting up to 9 a.m. and the mayor is trying to reach you about the affordable housing project the bank is funding." "Tell the mayor I'm in a meeting until 5, Robert replied without hesitation. "And about the Japanese, prepare the Yamamoto Industries contracts. They'll accept our terms or find financing elsewhere." Robert knew the Japanese had no choice. His research team had thoroughly investigated Yamamoto's financial situation. They were desperate, caught between impatient Japanese creditors and an American market they couldn't penetrate on their own. Robert would offer just enough to save them, charging interest that would guarantee obscene profits for First National over the next 5 years. That was how the game worked, and Robert played it better than anyone else. Not out of cruelty, but out of a clear understanding that feelings are luxuries successful businessmen cannot afford. Every decision based on pure logic, every move calculated to maximize returns, every relationship evaluated by potential profit. The Bentley stopped in front of the 40-story glass and steel building housing the First National Bank. Robert adjusted his Italian silk tie and stepped out with the posture of an emperor inspecting his kingdom. The uniformed doorman opened the double bronze doors, greeting him with a bow that Robert accepted as a matter of course. The bank's lobby buzzed with typical morning activity. Customers lined up at tellers. Executives chatted in groups near the elevators. Phones rang non-stop at service counters. Robert moved through it all like Moses parting the Red Sea. People instinctively stepped aside, creating an invisible corridor for his passage. Inside the executive elevator, Robert caught his reflection in the polished stainless steel. He saw a man at the peak of his power, absolute master of a financial empire moving billions of dollars annually. Every line on his face was carved by determination. Every gray hair at his temples a medal from corporate battles won. The doors opened on the 40th floor, revealing the nerve center of his empire. The trading floor took up the entire central space, surrounded by giant screens showing stock quotes, commodity indexes, and exchange rates from dozens of countries. It was a command center coordinating investments on 5 continents, decisions affecting millions who would never know his name. "Mr. Mitchell," Jennifer approached with a perfectly organized stack of documents. "Overnight reports from Tokyo and London operations. Net profit exceeded projections by 12%. Robert flipped through the numbers with the satisfaction of a general reviewing victory reports. 12% above expectations meant millions of extra dollars. Millions that would add to other millions, building an empire more solid, more invulnerable. That he walked to the window of his private office, watching Manhattan stretch below like a gigantic chessboard where he moved the most valuable pieces. Down there, people rushed to jobs that barely paid their bills, struggled for loans Robert approved or denied with a nod, dreamed of financial independence he had earned by sacrificing anything that could be mistaken for hesitation or compassion. The intercom buzzed quietly. "The Yamamoto representatives have just arrived," Jennifer announced. "Shall I escort them to the conference room?" Robert straightened his tie and walked to his desk, where the contracts were already waiting. A few more signatures, a few more millions, another victory in the silent war he waged daily against anyone daring to challenge him on the only battlefield that truly mattered. The financial one. This was how another day began in the life of Robert Mitchell. A day promising to be as profitable as all the others that had made him the most feared and respected man in Manhattan's financial district. The bronze doors of the First National Bank opened with a mechanical whisper, letting in a blast of cold November air that sent dry leaves swirling across the marble lobby. Sarah Thompson hesitated for a moment at the entrance, her eyes scanning the intimidating space. Soaring ceilings, imposing columns, voices and footsteps echoing like in a cathedral dedicated to money. She held tighter the little hands of Tommy and Timmy, her 4-year-old twin boys, who looked around with the innocent curiosity of children, unaware of the storm of anxiety consuming their mother's chest. The boys wore second-hand jackets Sarah had bought at the church bazaar. Clean and well cared for, but clearly worn by time and use. Her own clothes told a similar story. The black coat that had belonged to her mother, the synthetic leather purse with fraying straps, and the shoes she had carefully polished the night before to hide signs of wear. "Mommy, this place is so big," Tommy murmured, his tiny voice echoing in the vast space. He pressed close to Sarah's leg, his blue eyes wide as he watched the men in suits hurry by, talking on phones and carrying leather briefcases. "It is, sweetheart," Sarah replied, forcing a reassuring smile while her heart hammered against her ribs. "But we won't be here long." Timmy, always more fearless than his brother, pointed at the crystal chandelier dominating the center of the lobby. "Mommy, look at all the little lights. It's like Cinderella's movie." A lump tightened in Sarah's throat. Her children saw magic where she saw only the vast distance between their world and this temple of wealth. But she had no choice, not anymore. Last week's tests had confirmed her worst fears. The boy's congenital heart condition was worsening faster than doctors had predicted. The surgery could no longer wait. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the bank's cool, scented air, and walked toward the reception desk. Her footsteps sounded different against the marble, softer, less confident than the other clients. She noticed how the security guards watched her discreetly, how some people averted their eyes as she passed. The receptionist was an elegant middle-aged woman with blonde hair neatly styled in a low bun, wearing a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. She looked up from her papers with a professional, automatic smile, but Sarah caught the slight falter when she assessed her appearance. "Good morning," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'd like to speak with someone about a loan, please." "Certainly," replied the receptionist, whose name tag read Beverly Watson. "Are you already a First National Bank customer?" "No, I'm not." Sarah felt heat rise up her neck. "But I really need help. It's a medical emergency." Beverly frowned slightly, her eyes shifting discreetly from Sarah to the twins, who were now visually exploring the artwork on the walls. "Well, normally our personal loans require a banking history and a prior credit evaluation." "Please," Sarah interrupted, her voice betraying the desperation she had been trying to hold back for the first time. "My children, they need emergency heart surgery. The doctors said it can't wait more than 2 weeks." Tommy chose that moment to come up to the counter, resting his little hands on the polished surface. "The lady is pretty, Mommy," he said with the brutal honesty of children. "Why does she look sad?" Beverly forced another smile, but Sarah noticed how she avoided the boy's direct gaze. "I'm not sad, dear. Just thoughtful." Sarah bent down to be level with her sons. Timmy, why don't you sit in those chairs over there?" She pointed toward a nearby waiting area. "You can play with Mommy's little toy cars while I talk to the lady. Okay?" She pulled 2 small plastic cars from her purse, the only toys she had brought, and the twins obediently headed toward the leather armchairs, making low motor noises, politely. "They're lovely," Beverly commented, and this time her smile seemed more genuine. "Identical twins?" "Yes," Sarah nodded, turning her attention back to the receptionist. "They were born with a condition called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. They've already had 2 surgeries as babies, but now they need the Fontan surgery. It's the last stage of treatment." Beverly looked genuinely moved. "That must be very hard for you." "I know," Sarah admitted, struggling to hold it together. "Insurance covers part of the costs, but not all. I need $150,000 to cover the specialist's fees, the special materials. Without it, She couldn't finish the sentence. The possibility was too unthinkable to voice. Beverly typed something on the computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "May I have your full name and social security number?" "Sarah Elizabeth Thompson." Sarah gave the numbers, watching as Beverly entered the information. The receptionist's face tightened slightly as the data appeared on the screen. "Ms. Thompson," Beverly said carefully, "I see here that you work as a nursing assistant at Mercy General?" "Yes, the night shift. I've worked there for 8 years." Sarah felt defensive, as though her job was somehow insufficient. "And your annual income is?" "32,000, Sarah answered. anticipating the question. I know it's not much, but I'm very responsible with money. I'm never late with rent or bills. I can provide references. Beverly looked clearly uncomfortable. She glanced around discreetly as if seeking guidance. Ms. Thompson, I need to be honest with you. A loan of $150,000 usually requires a much more substantial income as guarantee. I have a house, Sarah said quickly. I inherited it from my mother when she passed away. It's paid off. It can be used as collateral. What's the appraised value of the property? Sarah hesitated. About $75,000, more or less. But I could get a second mortgage or... Beverly shook her head gently. Unfortunately, that still wouldn't be enough to secure a loan of this amount. The desperation Sarah had tried to contain started leaking through her carefully built defenses. Please, there has to be something. Some program, some exception. They're just children. From the waiting area, she could hear Tommy telling an elaborate story to Timmy about the toy cars. Something involving a race to save the world. Their innocent voices painfully contrasted with the adult conversation about money and guarantees that would decide if they had a chance to grow. Beverly leaned forward, lowering her voice. Ms. Thompson, I wouldn't normally suggest this, but given the urgent nature of the situation, it might be worth speaking directly with our general manager. He has the authority to approve loans outside of normal parameters in exceptional cases. Yes, please, Sarah said immediately. I'd do anything to talk to him. Beverly hesitated again, her eyes shifting to the twins, then back to Sarah. I should warn you, Mr. Mitchell is, well, he's very focused on the financial aspects. He's not known for making exceptions for emotional reasons. I understand, Sarah nodded, though she didn't fully understand. But I'll try to convince him. I have to try. Beverly picked up the phone. Mr. Mitchell? Sorry to interrupt, but I have a Ms. Thompson here who would like to talk about an emergency loan. Yes, sir. I understand it's not the usual procedure, but this is a medical emergency involving children. I see. Yes, sir. She hung up and looked at Sarah with an expression hard to read. He will see you in 15 minutes. Room 4015, 40th floor. The executive elevators are at the back of the lobby. Thank you, Sarah said, feeling a mix of relief and terror. Thank you so much. Ms. Thompson, Beverly called as she was walking away. Good luck. I sincerely hope everything works out for your boys. Sarah went to where the twins were playing, watching them for a moment. Tommy had created an elaborate rescue mission where his red car saved Timmy's blue one from an imaginary disaster. They were so absorbed in the game, so perfectly innocent about the drama unfolding around them. Boys, she said softly. Let's go upstairs to talk to the bank boss. The boss? Like a king? Timmy asked, his eyes shining with curiosity. Something like that, Sarah replied, taking their hands. And you'll be my brave princes. Okay? As they walked toward the elevators, Sarah said a silent prayer. She didn't know what to expect on the 40th floor, but she knew she was about to fight for her children's lives in the only way she had left. Asking for mercy from a stranger whose reputation suggested mercy was not in his vocabulary. The executive elevator rose silently through 40 floors, and Sarah felt her stomach tighten with each number that flashed on the digital display. Tommy and Timmy were unusually quiet, perhaps sensing the tension radiating from their mother like waves of heat. The mirrored walls of the elevator reflected her image endlessly. A 35-year-old woman who looked 50, her brown hair pulled back into a ponytail that barely hid her premature gray roots, blue eyes shadowed by dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worries. Mommy, your hands are shaking, Tommy observed, with the unsettling perception children sometimes have. Sarah looked down and realized he was right. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the small folder of medical documents she had brought. X-rays, cardiologist reports, hospital estimates. All evidence of a battle she had been fighting alone for months. I'm just a little nervous, sweetheart, she murmured, forcing a smile. Sometimes adults get nervous when they have important conversations. The elevator stopped softly, and the doors opened to reveal a hallway that looked more like the lobby of a five-star hotel. Persian rugs covered the polished hardwood floors, Expensive paintings decorated the walls, and the silence was so complete that Sarah could hear her own breathing and elegant secretary. Jennifer, according to the gold nameplate on her desk, looked up as they approached. Her blonde hair was pinned in a perfect bun, and she wore a dress that cost more than Sarah's monthly salary back when she still had a job. "Mrs. Thompson?" Jennifer asked with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell will see you now. However, I must mention he has only 15 minutes before his next meeting. 15 minutes to save her children's lives." Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "And the children?" Jennifer hesitated, looking at the twins with an expression that suggested children were not frequent visitors on this floor. "They stay with me," Sarah said firmly. "Please." Jennifer seemed about to protest, but something in Sarah's expression made her reconsider. "Very well. This way." She led them down an even more impressive corridor to a double mahogany door that opened to what could only be described as a power sanctuary. Robert Mitchell's office occupied an entire corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. The desk was a unique piece of black marble that looked like it had been carved by Italian masters, and behind it, in a leather chair resembling a throne, sat the man who had the power to save or condemn her children. Robert Mitchell was on the phone, gesturing impatiently while speaking in a low but authoritative voice. "I don't care what the minority shareholders think, David. If they don't like the terms, they can sell their shares on the open market." "Yes, that's exactly my point." He gestured for Sarah to sit in the chairs arranged in front of his desk, but did not interrupt the conversation. Sarah settled on the edge of the chair, pulling Tommy and Timmy closer to her. The boys were mesmerized by the view through the window, Central Park stretching out like a green carpet below, with people walking the trails, tiny as ants. 2 minutes, Robert said into the phone, finally fixing his gaze on Sarah and sizing her up like a merchant assessing goods. It was a cold, calculated look that made her feel as though she was being weighed on an invisible scale. He was younger than she expected, probably a few years younger than her, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of a hardness beyond age. They were the eyes of someone used to making decisions that affected lives without losing a night's sleep over them. "David, I have to hang up. I have a charity case to attend to." The tone in which he said charity made Sarah shudder. He hung up and leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced on the desk. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice polite but completely devoid of warmth, "I understand you need a substantial loan." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "My children. They need urgent heart surgery." Robert didn't look at the twins. His eyes remained fixed on Sarah with laser-like intensity. $150,000, based on what I've been informed. "Yes, sir. I know it's a lot of money, but tell me about your current financial situation," Robert interrupted, picking up a Mont Blanc pen and spinning it between his fingers. "Income, assets, credit history." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. This was the moment she had feared. "Well, I lost my job at the hospital 6 months ago. Budget cuts. I worked as a nursing assistant at Mercy General." "Current income?" "I'm looking for work. I do some part-time jobs when I can. Cleaning, elder care." "How much per month?" Sarah hesitated. "It varies. Maybe $400, $500. Robert jotted something on a pad. His expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed a slight stiffening in his shoulders. "Properties? I had a house. I had to sell it to pay previous medical bills. Now we're at the Salvation Army shelter on 34th Street. This time, Robert looked up, and Sarah saw something, possibly surprise, flash across his face before it was replaced by his usual professional mask. "A shelter. Temporarily," Sarah added quickly. "As soon as I get a job, we'll leave. I'm a good worker. I have references. Credit history." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. "Compromised. The medical bills. When Danny was diagnosed with cancer 3 years ago, before he died, we had to take out loans, use credit cards. Danny, my husband, he died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer." Robert stopped writing and looked at her for a long moment. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Tommy chose that moment to whisper, "Mommy, I'm thirsty." "Sure, honey," Sarah murmured, pulling him closer. "Just a little longer." Robert finally spoke, his voice sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Thompson, I'll be direct because I don't believe in wasting time, yours or mine. What you're asking for is impossible." Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "Mr. Mitchell, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Robert continued, his voice gaining a condescending tone that made Sarah shrink. "You're asking me to lend $150,000 to someone without a steady income, no assets to offer as collateral, living in a shelter with a shattered credit history. In what universe does that make financial sense?" "But my children—" "Your children," Robert interrupted, finally looking at Tommy and Timmy, "are not the responsibility of this bank. This is a business, Mrs. Thompson, not a charity." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes but forced herself not to cry. Not in front of the boys. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand it seems risky, but I swear I would find a way to pay you back. I will work 2-3 jobs if necessary. I can sign any contract." Robert stood, clearly signaling the meeting was over. "Mrs. Thompson, you do not seem to understand the reality of the situation. Even if you work 24 hours a day for the rest of your life, your ability to repay would not justify a loan of this magnitude." "Please!" Sarah stood as well, her voice starting to crack. "They will die without this surgery. The doctor said we have at most 2 weeks." "That's unfortunate," Robert said, his voice as cold as an Arctic gust. "But it's not the first national bank's problem. I suggest you seek charities, government programs, or maybe start an online fundraising campaign. That's common nowadays." Sarah looked at him, incredulous. "Do you have children, Mr. Mitchell?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, his professional mask wavered. "That's irrelevant to our discussion." "It's relevant to me," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength born of desperation. "Because if you did, you'd understand that a mother will do anything to save her children. Anything." Robert pressed a button on his desk. "Jennifer, please ask security to escort Mrs. Thompson to the exit." Sarah felt the world crumble around her. "Mr. Mitchell, please. I'm begging you. Not as a client, not as a business opportunity. I'm begging you as a human being." "Mrs. Thompson," Robert said, walking around the desk and stopping a few feet from her, "I'll give you some free advice. Stop wasting time on impossible fantasies and focus on realistic solutions. Accept that some battles can't be won, and concentrate on making the time your children have left as comfortable as possible." The words hit Sarah like a physical slap. She stumbled back, instinctively pulling the twins closer. Tommy and Timmy now realized something was terribly wrong. The adults' voices had taken on a tone they recognized from other bad moments in their young lives. "You're telling me to give up on them?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm telling you to be realistic," Robert replied, retreating behind his desk as though it were a necessary barrier between them. "The world is a tough place, Mrs. Thompson. Not every story has a happy ending." The door opened and 2 uniformed security guards entered. They were large men, polite, but clearly prepared to escort unwanted visitors out of the building. "Mrs. Thompson?" one said gently. "If you could come with us?" Sarah looked one last time at Robert Mitchell, who had already turned his attention back to the papers on his desk, as if she had never existed. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice now filled with a dignity born of absolute despair, "I hope you never have to beg for the life of someone you love, because if you do, I hope you find someone with more compassion than you showed today." Robert didn't lift his eyes. "Jennifer, have the Yamamoto representatives come up in 5 minutes." As the adults' voices rose and fell in waves of tension, Tommy and Timmy Thompson stayed silent in the corner of the luxurious office. Their small figures were almost lost among the Italian leather armchairs, which were bigger than they were. The boys had learned, through a childhood marked by hospitals and stressful situations, to be exceptionally well-behaved when they sensed their mother was fighting for them. Tommy, always the more observant of the two, noticed how his mother's breathing had grown more labored, how her hands trembled slightly as she held the folder of documents. He recognized these signs. They were the same ones he saw when she compulsively checked their pulses in the middle of the night or whispered to doctors, thinking they were asleep. Timmy, meanwhile, was fascinated by the black marble desk dominating the office. His distorted reflection stared back at him on the polished surface, and he made a silent, funny face at himself, trying not to laugh out loud. But the fun didn't last long. His lips, already showing a faint bluish tint characteristic of his condition, started turning darker as the effort to stay quiet and alert took a toll on his already overworked little heart. Tommy noticed the change in his brother immediately. It was a connection only twins share, intensified by their shared struggle against a condition that made them more fragile than other kids their age. He moved closer to Timmy and whispered something in his ear, causing his brother to lean back in his chair, trying to regulate his breathing as the doctors had taught them. That's when Tommy saw his mom's small backpack was lying open on the floor, next to the chair where she had been sitting. Some papers had fallen out, and Tommy, always helpful, bent down to pick them up. His small, pale hands carefully gathered the documents, medical reports he couldn't read, but whose headings he recognized from countless hospital visits. But as he was putting the papers back into the backpack, his fingers touched something different. An old photograph, yellowed around the edges, hidden between the documents. His childlike curiosity made him pull it out to take a closer look. The photo showed his mother, but a version of her Tommy barely recognized. It was a younger Sarah, with long hair and a radiant smile that he rarely saw these days. She wore a simple yet pretty dress, and standing next to her, with his arm around her waist, was a man Tommy didn't recognize. The man in the photo wore a well-tailored suit and had a confident smile. His eyes, even in the faded picture, held an intensity that made Tommy feel strangely uncomfortable. There was something familiar about that face, but he couldn't place what. Tommy flipped the photo over and saw faded cursive writing, Sarah and Robert, university graduation, May 1985. In the lower corner, nearly illegible, was the word, forever. The boy looked from the photo to the man behind the massive desk, who was now saying harsh words to his mother in a tone that made Tommy want to hide. There was something in the shape of the chin, the line of the nose. His 4-year-old mind, not fully developed to make complex connections but sharp with a child's intuition, began to notice the similarities. "Timmy," he whispered to his brother. "Look at this." Timmy leaned in to see the photo, his blue eyes widening. Even he, usually less observant than Tommy, noticed the similarity in the shape of the eyes and jawline. "He looks like..." Timmy started, but Tommy cut him off with a wave. The two boys looked from the photo to Robert Mitchell, who kept talking to their mother in a tone that made them feel even smaller than they already were. The conversation was growing more intense, and Tommy noticed his mother starting to cry, though she tried to hide it. Something in his mother's desperate expression, combined with the photo's discovery, sparked a courage in Tommy he didn't know he had. If that man in the picture was who he thought he was, maybe they could find a way to help their mom with all this worry about money and surgeries. Tommy slowly got up, holding the photo with both hands. His steps were hesitant, not just from natural shyness, but also because moving made his heart work harder, and he felt the familiar fatigue settling into his small muscles. "Tommy, no," Timmy whispered, recognizing the determined look on his brother's face. "The man is angry." But Tommy kept walking, passing the chair where his mother sat, heading straight for the imposing desk where Robert Mitchell coldly and calculatedly rejected their mother's request. "This is not First National Bank's problem," Robert was saying, his voice sharp as ice. "I suggest you contact charitable organizations." "Excuse me?" Tommy's clear little voice cut through the adult's words like a ringing bell. Robert stopped mid-sentence, his irritation obvious at being interrupted by a child. He looked down at Tommy with a mix of surprise and annoyance, clearly unaccustomed to being interrupted by such a small visitor in his corporate sanctuary. "Child," he said, his voice heavy with barely contained impatience. "Adults are talking. Please go back to..." "Mom said to find our daddy here," Tommy said with the brutal honesty only children have, holding up the photo so Robert could see. His little hands trembled slightly, not just from nervousness but from the physical effort of standing and speaking after the day's tension. Sarah stopped mid-sentence, her face paling when she saw what her son held. Tommy? No. Are you him? Tommy asked, looking directly at Robert with that innocent confidence children sometimes have at the most inconvenient moments. Are you our daddy? Robert was about to dismiss the child with an irritated reply, maybe even call security early to remove the disturbing family from his office. His mouth opened to speak harsh words that would send the boy back to the corner. But then his eyes moved to the yellowed photo in Tommy's small hands, and every word he was about to say died in his throat. The silence that followed was so deep, the only sound in the office was the almost imperceptible ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall and Tommy's slightly labored breathing, as his small heart struggled to pump enough blood after the effort to get up and walk to the desk. Robert Mitchell, who, moments before had been the embodiment of corporate coldness, was now completely still, his eyes fixed on the yellowed photograph with an expression no one present could interpret. The photograph trembled in Robert's hands like a fragment of his own soul, torn away and forgotten somewhere dark in his memory. His fingers, which moments before had held a Mont Blanc pen with the confidence of someone who ruled financial empires, now shook almost imperceptibly as he picked up the yellowed image of little Tommy's hands. It was him, definitely him, 22 years old, dark shiny hair, wearing the same suit he had bought especially for graduation with the money he had saved over months working as a waiter. His smile in the photo was genuine, full of hope and endless possibilities. And beside him, radiant in a light blue dress that brought out her eyes, was Sarah. Sarah, not the desperate, worn woman sitting in front of him now, but the Sarah he had met at Columbia University. The Sarah who laughed at his bad jokes, who stayed up late studying with him in the library, who believed they could conquer the world together. May 1985. The date on the back of the photo hit him like lightning. 16 years ago. 16 years since. The memories he had buried under layers of ambition and financial success began to resurface like an avalanche. He was back in Columbia's hallways, running to meet her after international economics class, the one she hated but attended just because he was there. Robert! Her voice echoed in his memory. Wait, I have incredible news. He remembered how she ran toward him, her brown hair flying in the spring campus breeze, her eyes shining with excitement that made his heart race. They had made plans, naive and romantic plans of two young lovers believing love could overcome any obstacle. We'll get married after graduation, he had said one night, lying on the campus grass, looking at the stars. I'll get a job at some bank, you can finish your nursing degree, and we'll have a little house in the suburbs with a white picket fence. And kids? She had asked, turning to look at him with those eyes that seemed to hold all the love in the world. At least 3, he had answered, kissing her forehead. Maybe more. But then came May 1985, graduation, and 3 days later the call that changed everything. Mr. Mitchell? This is Jonathan Blackstone from Blackstone and Associates. We have an offer for you. Wall Street, $100,000 a year, a fortune for a boy from a humble Bronx background. But there was an unspoken condition, total availability.
No distractions. No tais.
Sarah, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he had said, even though he already knew he was lying to himself. It'll be just for a few years until I get established. She had tried to understand. God, how she had tried. But when he started working 80 hours a week, when he canceled the 4th dinner in a row, when he stopped returning her calls, she began insisting. We need to talk, Robert. It's important. But he was obsessed. Every closed deal, every client won, every dollar earned was an adrenaline shot he was addicted to. Sarah became an inconvenience, a reminder of a life he had left behind. Then he did the unthinkable, changed his phone number, moved apartments. When she showed up at the office, he told security he didn't want to see her. When she sent letters, he threw them away without opening. Mr. Mitchell, a young woman named Sarah keeps calling. His secretary had said months later. She says it's urgent. Tell her I don't work here anymore. He had replied without looking up from his papers. After that, the calls stopped. He assumed she had finally given up, moved on, found someone who deserved her. He convinced himself he'd done the right thing, for both of them. But now, looking at that photo, doing the math his analytical mind couldn't avoid, the truth hit him like a tsunami. May 1985. September 1985, when Sarah's calls became more urgent. March 1986, when 2 babies would have been born if she had been pregnant that May. The twins, Tommy and Timmy, 4 years old. No, couldn't be. He refused to believe it. But when he lifted his eyes from the photograph and looked at the 2 boys watching the conversation with the seriousness only very sick children possess, the denial died in his mind. Tommy had his eyes. Not just the color, a rare grayish blue, but the shape, the intense expression even at such a young age. And Timmy, God, Timmy had the same jawline Robert saw in the mirror every morning. But there was more. The way Tommy tilted his head when he was thinking, just like Robert did during business meetings. The way Timmy nervously drummed his fingers, a habit Robert had developed as a child and never fully lost. His children, they were his children. And Sarah had tried to contact him. She had tried to tell him. She probably tried to say she was pregnant, that she needed him, that they needed to be a family. And he had told his secretary to lie, thrown away her letters, hidden behind the walls of his corporate world. She had raised the boys alone. She had become a nurse, probably to find a job quickly and support 2 children. She had married another man, someone who gave his name to her children, who was a father to them when their real father was too busy accumulating wealth. And now she was there, begging for a loan to save the lives of the children he had abandoned before even knowing they existed. Children who were dying while he had more than enough resources to save them. Robert felt a dizziness that had nothing to do with the altitude of the 40th floor. He gripped the marble table, his knuckles turning white from the pressure. Accept that some battles can't be won, he had said moments earlier, and focus on making the remaining time as comfortable as possible for your children. For your children. He had told her to accept the death of her own children. Tommy kept looking at him with those intense, intelligent eyes. His eyes, waiting for an answer to his innocent but devastating question. Timmy moved closer to his brother, and Robert saw the slight bluish tint on his lips that showed the effort it took for his little defective heart just to stand. Hearts Robert had given them. Hearts failing, just as he had failed as a father even before they were born. Sarah was looking at him with a face that mixed horror and desperate hope she tried to hide. She knew he had recognized the photo. She knew he was doing the math. She knew the entire dynamic of this meeting had changed irreversibly. "Are you our daddy?" Tommy asked again, his small voice cutting through the heavy silence. Robert looked at the boy, his son, and realized his life had just been split into 2 parts. Before and after this question. Before and after discovering that he had children in this world. Before and after knowing they were dying. Before and after understanding that Sarah Thompson was not just another desperate person begging for charity. She was the mother of children he never knew he had. The silence in the office was deafening. Robert held the photograph so tightly that his hands trembled, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might tear the picture to pieces. When he finally looked up, his eyes were colder than she had ever seen, not even when they were young and he was angry. "How much do you want?" he asked, his voice sharp like shattered glass. Sarah blinked, confused. "What? How much do you want to leave and never come back?" Robert repeated, abruptly rising from his chair. His imposing height made him seem even more intimidating. 10,000? 50,000? What's the price of your con, Sarah? The words hit her like a slap. Sarah stood up too, her legs trembling barely enough to hold her. "Con? You think this is a con?" "Of course it is." Robert exploded, pacing back and forth behind the desk like a caged animal. "You show up here after 16 years with 2 sick boys, a convenient photo, and a touching story about needing money. How long did you plan this? How long did you watch me study my life?" "Robert, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He cut her off, pointing an accusing finger at her. "You found out I became successful, that I have money, and decided it was time to make your move. You got 2 sick kids from somewhere. An orphanage, maybe? and made up this elaborate lie about them being my sons. Sarah felt hot tears start to run down her cheeks. Do you really think I would do that? Use sick children to... I don't even know what you're capable of, Robert shouted, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The Sarah I knew in college never would have walked into my office with a story like this. But people change, right? Especially when money's involved. The twins, who had been quiet until then, started to stir. Timmy moved closer to his mother, his lips growing bluer under the stress of the moment. Tommy, always the protector, positioned himself between his mother and Robert. His little fists clenched. Don't yell at our mommy, Tommy said, his voice small but determined. Robert stopped pacing and looked at the boy. For a moment, something shifted in his eyes. A mix of surprise and recognition? It was exactly what he might have done at that age. His own mother used to tell stories about how he would stand between her and the world when things got tough. But he pushed those thoughts away. Sarah, take those kids and get out of my office. Now. They are your children, Robert, Sarah said, her voice broken but steady. Our children. Prove it, he challenged, folding his arms. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her movements were shaky, but there was a dignity in her stance Robert couldn't ignore. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you stopped taking my calls. You could have made that up. He was in Hong Kong that day, closing his first big international deal. He remembered why he had missed his grandmother's funeral because of that trip. They each weighed 4 pounds, 2 ounces, Sarah continued, her words stumbling out. They spent 3 months in the neonatal ICU. I didn't have money to pay. I worked as a cleaner in the hospital to help cover costs while studying nursing on the side. Sarah, stop. I tried to find you for 8 months, Robert. 8 months? She shouted, her voice finally breaking. I went to your apartment. It was empty. I went to your job. They said you weren't working there anymore. I sent mail to your new address 16 times. Your secretaries lied to me, saying you were in meetings, traveling, didn't remember me. Robert remembered. He remembered the orders he had given. Get rid of her, he had said. I don't want to hear that name again. I didn't want your money. Robert, Sarah continued, her voice turning into a rough whisper. I just wanted you to know they existed, that you would have a chance to know them. But you disappeared like you never existed. Then why didn't you keep trying? Why didn't you keep looking for me? Sarah laughed, but it was a bitter sound, joyless. And say what? Hi, Robert, remember me? I have 2 kids you obviously didn't want to know about. You made it very clear I wasn't part of your new world. So you married another man, Robert said, his voice oddly empty. I married David Thompson when the boys were 2, Sarah confirmed, lifting her chin. He was a nurse's aide, a good man who loved me and my kids. He adopted them, gave them his name. He was more of a father to them in 2 years than you ever were in their whole lives. The words cut Robert deeper than any failed business deal ever had. Where is he now? He died 2 years ago. Lung cancer. He used to smoke when he was younger, Sarah answered, her voice softening. We spent all our savings trying to save him. Lost the house, the car, everything. Moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in New Jersey. I worked 2 shifts at the hospital to pay the rent and the boys' medicines. Robert looked at the twins, who huddled near the door, clearly frightened by the argument. Timmy was struggling to breathe, and Tommy held his brother's hand, whispering something in his ear. The heart condition, Robert said slowly. It wasn't a question. Dilated cardiomyopathy, Sarah confirmed. The doctors said it's hereditary. They asked about the father's family history, but I didn't know. I never met your family. Robert felt like someone had kicked him in the chest. He sank heavily into the chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. My grandfather, he murmured. My grandfather died of heart problems when I was 12. And my father too. It was the first time he had spoken about his father in years. The man who died at 45, leaving Robert and his mother alone and poor in the Bronx. The man who always got winded climbing stairs, who had that bluish tint on his lips, Robert now recognized in the boys. "My God," he whispered, the reality finally hitting him like an avalanche. They really are, your children," Sarah finished. "Thomas Robert Thompson and Timothy Michael Thompson. Your children, Robert. Your children are dying, and you're the only person in the world who can save them." Robert looked at the boys again, and this time saw beyond their physical resemblance. He saw how Tommy protected Timmy, just like he had protected his mother as a child. He saw the smart curiosity in Timmy's eyes, the same curiosity that made Robert stand out in school despite coming from a poor neighborhood. He saw himself reflected in them, and the magnitude of what he'd lost, what he'd chosen to lose, hit him with a force that made him tremble. His children. He had children. Children who were dying because they inherited his heart condition. Children he'd rejected before he even knew they existed. And now, Sarah sat before him, no longer a stranger asking for charity, but as the mother of his children, begging for their lives. Robert Mitchell, the man who controlled millions of dollars, who made decisions affecting hundreds of people every day, who never hesitated in high-pressure moments, was completely paralyzed. Because for the first time in his life, he faced something that all the money in the world couldn't undo. The office seemed to be spinning around Robert. He gripped the marble desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white, struggling to keep his balance as shockwaves rippled through his whole body. His breath came in short, uneven bursts, like he was having heart problems himself. My grandfather. The memory hit with brutal clarity. Patrick Mitchell, sitting in his worn armchair in their small Bronx apartment, always with that dry cough and slightly blue lips. "It's just fatigue, kid," he used to say whenever Robert asked why he got short of breath climbing the stairs. "When you get my age, you'll understand." But he never reached old age. 58 years old. A sudden heart attack while watching TV. Robert remembered the sound. The grandfather's body falling from the chair, the dull thud that made his mother run into the room screaming. And his father, God, how had he forgotten? Gerald Mitchell, a construction worker, always exhausted when he came home. "Hard work tires you out," he'd say. But Robert now recalled the details a child of 8, 9, or 10 just can't fully grasp. The struggles to breathe, the extreme exhaustion, the hands sometimes shaking when he thought no one was looking. 45 years old. Dilated cardiomyopathy, when it was already too late for any treatment. "It's not just fatigue, Dad," Robert murmured to himself, the words slipping out like a groan. "It was the heart. It always was the heart." And now, his children, his own children, were dying from the same thing. The same genetic curse he'd carried all his life without knowing, which he had passed on to 2 innocent kids he hadn't even met. Robert looked at Tommy again, and this time it was as if he were seeing him through a new lens. The shape of his head, perfectly round like his own. The ears slightly pointed forward, a trait inherited from his father that had always annoyed him as a child. And the eyes, not just the same color but the same intensity, the same way of seeming to analyze and calculate everything all at once. Timmy, God, Timmy had the same way Robert had as a boy, that quiet thoughtfulness, as if always listening in on adult conversations, trying to understand a world too complex for his age. And the way he stood, shoulders slightly hunched forward, trying to seem smaller than he was. Robert had done the exact same thing as a child, trying to hide, trying not to draw attention. For years, he thought, and the guilt hit him like a giant wave. For years lost. First steps I never saw. First words I never heard. Nightmares I never comforted. Birthdays I never celebrated. He pictured Sarah, pregnant and alone, desperately trying to reach him while he deliberately avoided her. He imagined her giving birth to 2 premature babies in a cold hospital, with no one to hold her hand, no one to share the terror and joy of becoming a parent. He pictured her staying up nights beside incubators, praying her babies would survive, while he was in Hong Kong celebrating successful deals. She could have sued. A cold voice whispered in his mind. She could have forced a paternity test. She could have gone to the press. But she didn't. She protected me even when I abandoned her. The truth was even more devastating. Sarah had protected Robert from his own consequences. She had raised his children alone, worked herself to exhaustion to support them, found another man to be a father to the children he had rejected. And only now, when she was desperate, when all other options had run out, had she come to him. Not for money, not for revenge, for the children who were dying. Robert realized he was crying. Tears ran silently down his face, the first time he'd cried since his mother's funeral, 5 years earlier. His breathing was ragged, and he felt as if he was drowning in decades of bottled-up emotions. That's when he felt a small presence beside him. Tommy had quietly approached, his worried eyes fixed on Robert's face. The boy reached out a small hand and gently touched his arm. "Are you sad?" Tommy asked with that brutal honesty only kids have. Robert looked down at that little face, a miniature version of his own, and something inside him shattered. "Yes," he replied, his voice hoarse. "I'm very sad." "Why?" How do you explain to a 4-year-old decades of wrong choices? How do you say you're crying because you discovered you have children you never knew, who are dying from a disease you gave them, who could have had a father if you hadn't been a selfish coward? "Because I lost so much time," Robert said finally, the simplest truth he could offer. Timmy came closer too, more hesitant than his brother but clearly curious. He looked at Robert with those big, serious eyes, and Robert saw in them a reflection of his own introspection. "Mommy said you're our daddy?" Timmy said quietly, like it was a secret. The word struck him like lightning. Daddy. He was a father. These 2 little boys were calling him daddy, and he had lost 4 years of being called that. 4 years of being important in their lives. 4 years of being loved unconditionally in the way only children can love. "Are you going to take care of us?" Tommy asked, and there was such pure hope in his voice that Robert felt his heart break a little more. "Are you going to make our hearts better?" Timmy added, placing a small hand over his own chest. Robert looked at the 2 boys, his children, and saw not only his own physical traits but also his own need for protection, safety, and love that he had felt as a boy. He saw the innocent trust in their eyes, even after witnessing the violent argument between him and Sarah. They wanted him to save them. They believed he could. And for the first time since he had left the Bronx behind, Robert Mitchell felt something stronger than ambition, more powerful than greed, more important than success, that he felt love. Fierce, protective fatherly love coursing through his veins like liquid fire. He also felt something he'd forgotten even existed. The overwhelming sense that his life had a greater purpose than just accumulating wealth. Robert knelt down, bringing himself to the boys' level. His large, office-worn hands gently touched their small faces, and he memorized every feature, every mark, every sign that these kids belonged to him. "Yes," he said, his voice steady for the first time since seeing the photograph. "I will take care of you. I will make your hearts better." Robert walked to his desk with a determination Sarah had never seen in him, not even back in college when he was obsessed with some project. His movements were precise, every gesture charged with an urgency that made the office air feel electric. He grabbed the phone and dialed a number he clearly knew by heart. "Margaret? Robert Mitchell. Yes, I know it's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but I need to cancel everything." His voice had that authoritative tone shaped by years of leadership, but there was something different now, a personal intensity that went beyond business. On the other end, Sarah could faintly hear a woman's protesting voice. "No, Margaret, you don't understand. When I say everything, I mean everything. The meeting with the Japanese at 4? Cancelled. Tonight's dinner with Peterson? Cancelled. The board presentation tomorrow morning about the Singapore project? Cancelled." The voice on the other end grew louder, more insistent. "Listen carefully," Robert continued, his voice turning colder. "The $22 million contract with Hong Kong can wait. Yes, you heard me right. Can wait. Reschedule it for 2 weeks from now. If they can't wait, then they are not the partners we want." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. $22 million. He was canceling a $22 million contract like it was a dentist appointment. Robert pressed on, relentless. "And Margaret? Call Jonathan Steinberg. Tell him I need to talk to him about an urgent family matter. Tell him I need immediate access to the best pediatric cardiologists in Manhattan, preferably at Mount Sinai or Columbia Presbyterian. He paused, listening. No, it's not for me. It's for... Robert looked at the twins, his voice softening just slightly. It's for my children. Sarah saw Margaret's confusion clearly on the other line, because Robert had to repeat himself. My children, Margaret. I have children, and they need the best doctors money can buy. Now. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. David? Robert. I need you to sign an emergency loan authorization. His voice was perfectly calm, like he was discussing the weather. $150,000. The voice on the other end, which Sarah assumed was some kind of partner or financial director, started firing off quick questions. No specific collateral? I am the collateral, Robert said firmly. I authorize it under my personal responsibility and my company shares. More protests from the other side. David, I didn't call to hear your opinion about fiscal prudence. I called for you to process the loan. The money needs to be in the account by... He looked at Sarah. What's the full name? Sarah Thompson, she answered automatically, still in shock at what she was witnessing. Sarah Thompson.
Esa eraha tehao MPSON.
By the end of the day, if the bank causes issues, transfer from my personal account, and we'll sort it out later. Robert hung up before David could protest again and immediately dialed a third number. Dr. Whitmore? Robert Mitchell. Yes, I know you're in surgery, but I need 5 minutes. It's a family emergency. Thank you. He covered the phone's mouthpiece with his hand and turned to Sarah. Harrison Whitmore is the best pediatric cardiologist on the East Coast. He operated on the governor's son last year. Sarah just nodded, unable to form words. This wasn't the same man who had yelled at her half an hour earlier. This wasn't the same man who had accused her of fraud. It was as if a switch had flipped inside him, transforming him completely. Dr. Whitmore, thanks for taking my call. I have 2 4-year-olds with hereditary dilated cardiomyopathy. Twins. They need immediate evaluation for possible transplant. Yes, I can be at the hospital in 2 hours. They'll be with me. He listened for a few seconds, grabbing a pen and making quick notes on a pad. Perfect. Dr. Richardson as well? Excellent. And doctor, one thing, they are my children. Do whatever is necessary. Money is no object. When he hung up, the office was filled with a silence that felt like it weighed tons. Robert turned to Sarah, and she saw his eyes were still red, but there was a determination in them that was almost frightening. The doctors will see us at 4:30, he said, his voice softer now. Dr. Whitmore and Dr. Richardson. They'll run all the necessary tests today. Robert, I can't accept. Sarah. He stepped closer, and for the first time since she'd entered the office, his posture wasn't intimidating. You're not accepting anything. They're my children too. I should have been doing this for the last 4 years. He picked up the phone again, this time dialing a different number. James? Robert Mitchell. I need you to prepare the guest apartment. And the adjoining one as well. Yes, both suites. For a lady and 2 children. Indefinitely. And James? Get children's clothes. 4-year-old boys. Sizes 4 and 5 just to be sure. Whatever they need. Clothes, toys, everything. Sarah stood up abruptly.
No.
Robert, we can't stay in your apartment. We barely know each other now. You can't just... Where are you staying? He asked, ignoring her protests. At the
Comfort Inn in Queens.
Robert grimaced. With 2 sick kids. In Queens. 40 minutes from the best hospital in Manhattan. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that made his opinion of the situation clear. That's all we can afford. That's what you could afford, Robert corrected. Now you have other options. He approached the twins, who had been silent through all the calls, clearly impressed by their father's commanding presence. Robert knelt down again, bringing himself to their level. Timmy, he said softly, would you like to stay in a big apartment while the doctors take care of you? It has a beautiful city view and plenty of space to play. Tommy looked at his mother, then at Robert. Will you be there too? The simple question hit Robert like a punch. Will you be there too? When was the last time someone asked if he would be present? When was the last time his presence was wanted for reasons other than money or business? Yes, he answered, his voice slightly rough. I will be there too. Timmy, always the shy one, stepped a little closer. Do you have a TV? Robert couldn't help but smile, the first genuine smile in years. I have several TVs. And video games too. Tommy's eyes widened. Really? Mom never had money for video games. The innocence of that statement cut Robert deeply. Video games. Something so simple, so cheap to him, but an unreachable luxury for his kids. Well, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Now you're going to have video games. And anything else you want. Sarah seemed to be struggling between gratitude and discomfort. Robert, this is too much. We can't just invade your life like this. You're not invading anything, he replied, standing up. You are my family. I was the one who wasn't there in your lives. Now I am. He held out his hands to the boys. How about we go get your things from the hotel and then meet those doctors? Tommy immediately grabbed one of his hands, his small fingers disappearing completely in Robert's large palm. The feeling was overwhelming, electric, as if every nerve ending in his hand had awakened all at once. Timmy hesitated for a moment, looking to his mother for approval. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes, and the shy boy took Robert's other hand as well. And there, in his glass and marble office, overlooking Manhattan, Robert Mitchell held his children's hands for the first time. The hands were small and warm, slightly sticky in that way that children's hands always are. Tommy squeezed his fingers confidently, while Timmy held more delicately. As if still unsure if it was allowed, Robert looked down at those two tiny people who shared his DNA, who carried his facial traits, who had inherited his heart condition, and who now looked up at him with a mixture of curiosity and hope that he didn't deserve but would do anything to deserve. We're going to save your hearts, he murmured, more to himself than to them. We're going to make everything all right. And for the first time in his adult life, Robert Mitchell was talking about something infinitely more important than money. He was talking about love. Mount Sinai Hospital at 5:30 a.m. had that surreal quality of places that never really sleep. The relentless fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows down the halls, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with bad coffee hung in the air like a familiar, uncomfortable fog. Robert had been sitting in the pediatric surgery waiting room for 2 hours since Tommy and Timmy were taken into the operating room. His eyes were fixed on the double doors where his sons had disappeared, pushed on stretchers that seemed way too big for such small bodies. For the first time in 20 years, Robert Mitchell hadn't checked his phone even once. It was in the pocket of his wrinkled suit, the same suit he wore yesterday because sleep had been impossible, and even if it were ringing nonstop, he wouldn't have cared. $1 million deals could be falling apart, contracts could be getting canceled, his company could be burning down, and none of it mattered. His sons were on the operating table, having their little chests opened, sick hearts removed, and new hearts implanted. Everything else was irrelevant. Sarah sat beside him, but not close. There was a careful space between them, a distance that spoke of all the unresolved history, all the lost time, all the pain still pulsing between them like a stubborn, unhealed wound. She held a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, her hands trembling slightly each time a nurse passed by or the hospital intercom announced a medical code. 6 hours, she whispered for the 10th time. Dr. Whitmore said it would be 6 hours of surgery. Robert glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:45 a.m. Only 2 hours and 15 minutes had passed. They're strong, he said, the words coming out with a conviction he wasn't sure he felt. Tommy has that determination, and Timmy, he's tougher than he looks. Sarah looked at him with a mix of surprise and something that might have been relief. You really know them, don't you? I mean, in just 1 week. 1 week. It had only been 1 week since Robert found out he was a father, but it felt like a lifetime. A week of hospital runs for tests, of discovering food preferences and nighttime fears, learning that Tommy was brave to a fault and Timmy was observant in an almost eerie way. Tommy reminds me of myself as a kid, Robert said slowly. That thing of wanting to prove you're not afraid of anything. Yesterday he asked if he could visit the operating room before the surgery to see what it's like. Like it was an adventure. Sarah smiled faintly, the first genuine smile he'd seen on her since they reunited. He's always been like that. As a baby, he was always the one trying to climb the crib bars first. Always the one running toward danger while Timmy stood back, watching and deciding if it was safe. And Timmy? Robert asked, realizing he desperately wanted to know more, to catch up on every detail of the 4 years he'd missed. Timmy? Sarah hesitated, as if unsure whether she should share. Timmy talks about you when he thinks you're not listening. He stays in his corner, playing, and whispers things like, "Daddy is sad today," or "Daddy likes his coffee black just like I like my milk plain." Robert felt something tighten in his chest. Not physically, but emotionally, like his heart was learning to feel things it had forgotten how to process. He makes observations about me? He makes observations about everything. Always has. Sarah looked at her hands. When they were 2, Timmy said Frank wasn't our real dad because he doesn't have the same eyes as us. I thought he'd forgotten later, but apparently he always knew something was different. Frank, the husband who died of cancer, the man who took on the role Robert had rejected. Were you happy with him? Robert asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Sarah was silent for a long time, staring at the operating room doors. Frank was a good man, she said finally. He loved the boys as if they were his own from day one. He never questioned where they came from, never made them feel like they were less than a real family. She paused. But you asked if I was happy. Yes. I was content, safe, grateful. Sarah looked Robert straight in the eye. But no, I wasn't happy. Not the way someone should be happy in a marriage. The brutal honesty of her answer hit him like a punch. Why? Because you can't fake loving someone the same way you loved another person. And Frank knew that. He knew part of my heart stayed with the man who made me pregnant and disappeared. Robert closed his eyes. Sarah, No, she shook her head. Not now. Not today. Today is about Tommy and Timmy. Today is about giving them a chance to grow up and have normal lives. They fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. Less angry, more weighted by a shared sadness for the complexity of their lives. Tell me about when they were born, Robert said softly. Sarah took a deep breath, as if preparing to reopen an old wound. They were born 6 weeks early. I was alone. My mother had died 2 years before, and you weren't available. There was no accusation in her voice, just deep exhaustion. Timmy came first, weighing just 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Tommy was born 8 minutes later, 4 pounds, 5 ounces. Robert tried to picture it. 2 tiny babies, his sons, fighting for life in incubators while he was on the other side of the world, completely unaware of their existence. They stayed in the neonatal ICU for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of going to the hospital every day, pumping breast milk, praying they'd gain enough weight to come home. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Timmy got pneumonia in the 3rd week. Doctors thought. They thought he wouldn't make it. But he did. He did. And when I finally brought them home, they were so small that newborn clothes were still too big for them. I was so scared I'd hurt them just picking them up. Robert imagined Sarah, alone in an apartment, caring for 2 premature babies, terrified and exhausted. Imagined the sleepless nights, the constant fears, the tough medical decisions she made without anyone to help. When did they say their first words? Sarah smiled again, this time a much broader smile. Timmy said mama at 8 months. Tommy said no a week later. She laughed softly. That basically sums them up. Timmy always trying to please me. Tommy always testing the limits. And when did they start walking? Together. 13 months on the same day. I was in the kitchen making breakfast and heard Timmy screaming. I thought someone was hurt, but when I ran to the living room, they were standing in the middle of the room, holding hands, staggering like 2 little drunks. Robert laughed, and the sound surprised him. When was the last time he'd laughed at something genuinely sweet instead of something cruelly successful? Have they always done everything together? Almost everything. Tommy protects Timmy from anything he thinks is dangerous, even if it's just an adult conversation he doesn't want his brother to hear. And Timmy always shares everything with Tommy. If I gave him a piece of cake, he'd automatically split it in half. My sons, Robert thought. They existed, grew, developed personalities, faced challenges, had joys, and I wasn't there for any of it. The hospital intercom crackled. Dr. Martinez, pediatric ICU. Dr. Martinez, pediatric ICU. Sarah tensed immediately. It's not about them, right? Dr. Martinez isn't their doctor. No, Robert said, but his own tension was palpable. Every hospital announcement in the last 2 hours had made them both freeze momentarily. They returned to silence, but now it was a silence heavy with anxiety. Robert looked at the clock. 7:15 a.m. 2 hours and 45 minutes that he stood and began pacing the waiting room, a growing restlessness taking hold of him. Throughout his professional life, he'd been someone who took action, controlled situations, made things happen. But here now all he could do was wait. Wait while other men operated on his sons. While other men made decisions that would determine if Tommy and Timmy lived or died. The helplessness was unbearable. Robert, Sarah called softly. Sit down. You're making me nervous. He obeyed, but his hands couldn't stay still. He intertwined his fingers, pulled them apart, rubbed his palms against his thighs. When was the last time you prayed? Sarah asked suddenly. The question caught him completely off guard. What? Prayed? When was the last time? Robert considered it. At my mom's funeral, I guess. 5 years ago. No, actually, I think it was at my dad's funeral when I was 15. Do you believe in God? He stopped. It was a question he'd avoided for decades, one irrelevant to contracts and profits. I don't know. I never really thought about it. Maybe it's time to think. Sarah closed her eyes and lowered her head slightly, her lips moving silently. Robert realized she was praying for Tommy, for Timmy, probably for him. He looked down at his own hands, large and calloused from years of shaking hands in business, signing contracts, building an empire that suddenly seemed completely unimportant. If there is someone up there, he thought hesitantly, if there's some kind of force or power or whatever it is, please save my sons. I know I don't deserve it. I know I abandoned them. I know I'm the last guy in the world who should be asking for divine favors. But they're innocent. They did nothing wrong. If anyone has to pay for my sins, let it be me, not them. His hands trembled slightly. That I'll do anything, he silently promised. I'll give all my money. I'll dedicate my life to them. I'll be the father I should have been from the start. Just let them live. Please. 8 a.m. 3 hours. 9 a.m. For hours. A man in blue scrubs walked through the waiting room, and both Robert and Sarah stood up simultaneously, but he kept walking. 10 a.m. 5 hours. Robert had stopped trying not to care about the time. Every minute stretched like an eternity. He had memorized every crack in the wall, every stain on the carpet, every sound in the hospital around him. Sarah had stopped trying to talk. She sat with her arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly back and forth, eyes closed. 10:45 a.m. That is when the double doors opened and Dr. Harrison Whitmore emerged, still wearing surgical scrubs, his mask pulled down around his neck. His face was tired, but Robert couldn't read his expression. Sarah stood so quickly she almost stumbled. Robert rose more slowly, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone in the hospital could hear it. Dr. Whitmore approached them, his footsteps echoing in the waiting room silence like gunshots. Dr. Whitmore stopped in front of them and slowly removed his surgical gloves, folding them with deliberate care. The silence stretched for seconds that felt like hours, and Robert felt he could die right there if the wait lasted 1 second longer. Then the doctor smiled. Not a professional, controlled smile, but a genuine broad smile that lit up his tired face. Complete success, he said, his voice carrying the relief of 6 hours of complex surgery. Both hearts are working perfectly. Tommy tolerated the surgery exceptionally well, And Timmy, well, Timmy surprised us all with his resilience. The new hearts are beating strong and steady. For a moment, none of them moved. The words hung in the air as if they were something physical that needed to be absorbed slowly. Then Sarah collapsed. She didn't faint. She simply bent over herself, sobbing with an intensity that seemed to come from a place too deep for tears to reach. It was the cry of a mother who had carried the terror of losing her children for months, who had smiled at them every morning while secretly fearing each day could be their last. Robert acted instinctively, catching her before she fell, pulling her close against his chest. And then, to his own surprise, he began to cry too. Not restrained or discreet tears. They were deep, wrenching sobs, the tears of 20 years of an emotionally repressed life finally finding release. It was crying for all the lost time, for every night he hadn't been there to check if they were breathing in their cribs, for all the Christmas mornings he had missed, for all the times he had chosen money over love. Sarah clung to him, and he held her like she was a life jacket in a stormy sea. Their bodies trembled together with overwhelming relief, and for the first time in 5 years, they were not wounded ex-lovers or cautious adversaries. They were just two parents whose children had just been given a second chance at life. They will have normal lives, Dr. Whitmore said gently, clearly used to intense emotional reactions. They'll be able to run, play, and play sports when they grow up. They'll need lifelong anti-rejection medication and regular checkups, but that's it. They'll grow up, graduate, get married, have kids of their own. Everything. Robert lifted his head, still holding Sarah, and looked at the doctor through tears he was no longer ashamed to shed. When can we see them? They're still waking up from anesthesia. Another hour, maybe 2. But I can assure you they're okay. Very okay. Dr. Whitmore placed a gentle hand on Robert's shoulder. Mr. Mitchell, in 20 years of this kind of surgery, I've rarely seen new hearts adapt so quickly. It's as if those hearts had been waiting for Tommy and Timmy their whole lives. An hour and 40 minutes later, a nurse came to get them. Robert and Sarah walked down the sterile hospital corridors side by side, their footsteps echoing in the antiseptic silence. Robert's palms were sweating, and he realized he was more nervous now than he had been during the entire surgery wait. What if they don't recognize me? He thought. What if the anesthesia confused them? What if they're afraid of me? The nurse led them to a recovery room where 2 small beds were positioned side by side. Tommy and Timmy looked tiny in the hospital beds, their small torsos covered with bandages, tubes, and wires. But their eyes were open, cloudy from anesthesia, but open and alert. Timmy saw Robert first. "Daddy?" he whispered, his voice hoarse but filled with genuine joy. "Daddy's here." Robert approached Timmy's bed, his throat so tight he could barely breathe.
Hey, Sean.
"How are you feeling?" "My chest hurts," Timmy admitted. "But the nurse said it's because I have a new heart now, a strong heart." Tommy, in the bed beside him, turned his head with effort. "Daddy, did you bring video games?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "Tommy, you just had heart surgery, but I deserve video games because I was brave," Tommy declared with the relentless logic of a 4-year-old. Robert moved to stand between the 2 beds, placing a gentle hand on each boy's forehead. "You guys were the bravest boys in the whole wide world. And yes, when you get out of here, you'll have all the video games you want. Promise?" Timmy asked. "Promise. But more important than that." Robert hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. "I promise you'll never have to be brave alone again. Daddy's going to be here now. Forever." Tommy studied Robert's face with the seriousness of someone much older. "Even when we're not sick?" The question cut deeper than anything Robert had ever experienced in business. "Even when we're not sick." As if the presence of a father was something so extraordinary, it should only be expected in extreme circumstances. "Especially when you're not sick," Robert said firmly. "Daddy wants to be here for all the good parts too. For the games, for the playtime, for when you learn to ride a bike, for everything." Timmy smiled, a weak but radiant smile. "Mom, did you hear? Daddy said forever." Sarah, who had been quietly watching the interaction, wiped her eyes. "I heard, baby." 3 days later, Robert was in his office for the last time as the active CEO of Mitchell Financial Group. He had spent the past 72 hours completely restructuring his life, making changes that 6 months earlier would have seemed unthinkable. David Chen, his CFO and right-hand man for 8 years, sat across the desk, studying the documents Robert had placed in front of him. "Are you sure about this, Robert?" David asked for the third time. "You're promoting me to CEO and staying on just as board chairman? That means you'll be present in, what, one meeting a month? If that," Robert confirmed. "David, you've been running day-to-day operations for years. I was just getting in the way, micromanaging decisions you could make better than me. But what about the big contracts? The international negotiations? You'll make those decisions. If anything really needs my approval, I'll be just a phone call away." Robert stood and walked to the window overlooking Manhattan. "David, I built this empire thinking it would give me everything I needed. But I was wrong. I have 2 kids who barely know me and a woman who—" He paused, thinking of Sarah. "A woman I need to win back." David packed the documents into his folder. "Can I ask what changed? I mean, I know about your kids, but you seem like a different person." Robert considered the question. What had changed? Everything. Absolutely everything. "I almost lost them, David. Not just because of the illness, but because I was so obsessed with building something I thought was important, I nearly let slip the only things that really matter." He turned to look at David. "How many men do you know who reach the top and realize they're alone up there?" David nodded slowly. He himself was divorced and only saw his kids on weekends. "The company will thrive without me," Robert continued. "Actually, it'll probably thrive more. But my kids, they only get one childhood. And I've already lost 4 years of it." 2 weeks later, Robert stood in what would soon be the living room of a new house in Westchester. It was a stone colonial with 6 bedrooms, built in 1920 and fully renovated. It had a huge kitchen with a central island, a living room with a stone fireplace, an office with floor-to-ceiling shelves, and, most importantly, a 2-acre backyard with old trees perfect for a treehouse. Sarah was in the kitchen with the real estate agent, asking practical questions about heating systems and plumbing inspections. Tommy and Timmy, still moving slowly but clearly more energized each day, were exploring what would be their bedrooms. "Daddy," Tommy shouted from the stairs. "Can we have bunk beds?" "Only if you promise not to jump off," Robert yelled back. "Ah," came the disappointed response. Sarah appeared beside him, watching the boys run from room to room upstairs. "Are you sure about this? Such a big house, so far from the city." Robert looked at her, really looked. In the past 2 weeks, while the boys recovered in the hospital and then their apartment, he and Sarah had talked more than they had over their entire college years. Conversations about the future, the past, about how to raise 2 kids who had survived something no child should have to face. And slowly, carefully, with the delicacy of 2 people deeply hurt in the past, they were falling in love again. Not in the desperate, intense way they had at 20. This was a deeper, more conscious kind of love. It was the love of 2 people tested by life and coming through it with a clearer understanding of what really matters. "I've been sure of many wrong things in my life," Robert said, placing a hand on her waist. "But I'm sure of this. I'm sure of us. I'm sure I want to wake up every morning in the same house my kids live in. I'm sure I want to be present for every nightmare, every scraped knee, every little achievement." Sarah leaned against him. "And me? You?" Robert took a deep breath. "You're the woman I should have put first 5 years ago. You're the mother of my children. You're the strongest person I know, and I—" He stopped. The words stuck in his throat. "And you what? And I'm still in love with you. Never stopped being." Sarah stayed quiet for a long moment, watching Tommy and Timmy discover the skylights in the attic and make shadows on the wall with their hands. "Robert," she said finally, her voice soft, "if we do this, if we really try to be a family, there can be no half-truths. There can't be businessman Robert and Dad Robert as separate people. It has to be just Robert. Just Robert," he repeated. "I don't even know who that is anymore. It's been so long since I was just Robert that maybe I've forgotten how." Then we'll find out together. She turned in his arms and kissed him. A gentle, tentative kiss, full of promises and fragile hopes. It was a kiss that admitted both the wounds of the past and the possibility of a different future. When they pulled apart, Robert heard little footsteps coming down the stairs. "Mom! Dad!" Timmy came running, stopping abruptly when he saw the two hugging. "Are you dating?" Tommy appeared right behind his brother. "Of course they're dating, Timmy. They're going to get married again." "Again?" Sarah asked, amused. "Well, you were married when you had us, right?" Tommy said with the irrefutable logic of a child. "So that's getting married again." Robert laughed, a sound that had become more common in recent weeks. "Tommy, would you like me to marry your mom again? Only if you promise not to leave this time." The simplicity of the statement cut Robert deeply. "Only if you promise not to leave this time." 4 years old, and Tommy had already learned that the people you love can just disappear. Robert knelt to be at the boys' level, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "I promise I'll never leave again. Even when you grow up and don't want me around anymore, I'll still be here. Even when you're old and have your own families, I'll still be your dad." "What if you die?" Timmy asked, always the practical one. "Well, if I die, it'll be because I lived a long life, after watching you grow up and become amazing men. And even then, I'll still love you." Tommy considered this, then nodded in approval. "Okay then, you can marry Mom." "Such generosity," Sarah murmured, but she was smiling. Robert bought the house that afternoon. 6 months later. Robert was in the backyard of the Westchester house, pushing Tommy on the swing he had installed on the 100-year-old oak tree. The swing had been his first big win as a present dad. 2 hours struggling with ropes and screws while YouTube tried to teach him skills he'd never needed before. "Higher, Dad! Higher!" Tommy shouted, kicking his legs through the air with joy. "Not too high," Timmy warned from the swing next to him. "Remember we just had our heart checkups?" The checkups had been on Tuesday. 6 months post-surgery, normal heart function, no signs of rejection. Dr. Whitmore had said they were his healthiest patients. Robert looked at the house, where Sarah was at the kitchen window, watching them. She wore an old t-shirt and jeans, had flour in her hair from baking cookies with the boys earlier, and she was 3 months pregnant. Pregnant. They had found out last week, and Robert was still processing the news. Another child. A chance to be present from the first ultrasound, the first doctor's appointment, the first kick. Sarah waved at him from the window, and he waved back, feeling that tightness in his chest he had learned to recognize as pure happiness. "Dad," Timmy said, "you're smiling at nothing again." "I'm smiling at you," Robert corrected, slowing Tommy's swing. "No, you smile at nothing sometimes. Like you have a good secret," Tommy observed. Robert stopped the swings altogether and knelt between the two boys. "My good secret," he thought. "My secret is that 9 months ago, I was the unhappiest man in New York, and now I'm the happiest. Can I tell you my secret?" he asked. Both boys nodded solemnly. "My secret is that I almost lost you, not just because of your hearts, but because I was foolish and thought other things were more important than being your dad." "What things?" Timmy asked. "Money, work, being important to people who didn't really care about me." Tommy frowned. "That's really foolish, very foolish. But you know what happened?" "What?" "You saved me. You taught me the only thing that really matters is loving people and being loved by them. And that sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a second chance to make it all right." Timmy leaned forward in his swing and kissed Robert's cheek. "We love you, Dad. Even when you were foolish. And I love you more than all the words in the whole wide world could ever say." Tommy jumped off the swing and hugged Robert tightly. "Dad?" "Yes." "Can you make hamburgers for dinner? Mom says you make the best hamburgers." Robert laughed, lifting Tommy and spinning him in the air. "Sure. Hamburgers for 3 men and a pregnant woman." "And for the baby too?" Timmy asked. "And for the baby too." Later that night, after the boys had bathed and brushed their teeth, after 3 stories, 2 glasses of water, a monster check under the bed, and 4 goodnight kisses each, Robert and Sarah sat on the back porch. The air was warm and filled with the scent of jasmine. Crickets chirped in the grass, and from somewhere distant came the sound of a dog barking. Sarah was nestled against Robert in the porch swing, her hand on her still small belly. "Are you happy?" she asked softly. Robert considered the question. Happy seemed too small a word for what he felt. He was grateful, fulfilled, peaceful, hopeful, and in love. He was a man who had discovered that everything he had worked for over 2 decades was worth less than a single afternoon in the backyard with his children. "I was thinking about something today," he said instead of answering directly. "What? If I had died 6 months ago, what would I have left behind?" Sarah was quiet, waiting. Money, company, some quotes in business papers, maybe a plaque on some building. Robert slowly rocked the swing with his feet. "But now when I die, I'll leave Tommy and Timmy, and this baby, and hopefully a few more kids. I'll leave people who will remember how I pushed their swings, how I made bad hamburgers but with lots of love, how I was there when they needed me. And does that make you happy?" "It makes me feel like my life had meaning." Sarah turned to look at him. "Robert." "Yes. You saved them too. Tommy and Timmy. Not just with the money for the surgery, but they needed a dad. They needed to know they were loved not just by me, but by you too. I had abandoned them for 4 years. But you came back. And in the mind of a 4-year-old, that's what matters. That you came back when they needed you most." Robert kissed the top of Sarah's head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with the vanilla smell of the cookies she'd baked earlier. "He calls me every morning, you know," he said softly. "Who?" "David. My replacement at the bank. He calls me every morning at 7 with reports on everything happening. Contracts, meetings, problems. And this morning when he called, I was making pancakes for Tommy and Timmy. And I realized I didn't care at all about what he was telling me. Not one bit. All I wanted was to see if Timmy was going to eat all his pancakes or save half for later, like he always does." Sarah laughed. "He's always been careful like that, even as a baby. Always saved a little for later. Our kids," Robert said, amazed. The phrase still felt new in his mouth. "Our kids have unique personalities and stories I want to know all of. They have fears and hopes and dreams, and I want to be there for all of them. And you will be. This time I will." They sat in silence for a while, gently swinging as the night deepened around them. Lights came on in neighboring houses, and Robert could hear the sound of a family having dinner next door. The normal, precious noise of people who care about each other living their lives. "Sarah," he said finally. Maybe it's not too late to start over," Robert murmured. Sarah nodded. "There's always time. As long as there's love, there's always time." They sat there for a while longer, saying nothing, listening to the sound of a heartbeat. For the first time in years, Robert didn't feel lost.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to keep watching.